Okay, so I've finished all of my boning. All of the boning is sewn in. What I'm doing now is I'm going through and cutting any loose threads that I have that could clog up my machine. And then I am also cleaning up anything that's hanging over my edge. So just making what's going to be my 5/8 inch seam a little bit cleaner. Okay. And then I have these from where I did my fitting, where it's kind of coming over there. I'm just going to taper that in so it's all in the same line. Just gently taper it. Okay, that's pretty good. Same thing on my other side. This one needs a bit more tapering. Okay, now I'm going to set that aside. Alright, now that we've done that, I'm doing view C, so I'm going to be skipping from step 12 to step 17, where it says with right sides together, pin lining to dress, matching seams, stitch upper edge, leaving in a 1-inch opening on middle front at large circles. So basically I'm going to put my lining and the right side of my fabric together, and I am going to stitch a 5/8 seam to put them together in one piece, leaving open a section so that later on I can put my shoulder straps through the 2 holes in the front and then do a proper fitting. So I'll show you how I'm going to pin together my lining and the right side of my fabric now. Welcome back. I apologize for the noise in the background. I have the windows open because it is our first sunny day of April here in New York. I am enjoying it immensely. So here is where we left off. We had put in all of our boning, which you can see the boning is right here in my lining, and then you're putting the right sides of your fabric together like this, and then you're just going to pin across the top here with right sides together. Before I stitch this, I just want to remind you that your boning, you want to try not to go over the boning with your stitching, so you're just trying to skim like the top of it right here within that 5/8 seam. And in addition to that, you should have at the front 2 markings where your strap for your dress is going to be. So mine are right here. I have 2 yellow markings I made with my chalk, and that's because later on, whenever I put this on and I do my fitting, I'm going to be putting the straps through there. So they say in the instructions to leave a 1-inch opening. That depends on what strap you used. So I just need this much space, so I probably won't leave an entire inch. But whatever straps you use, just make sure that you leave an opening that's large enough that you can fit your strap through it. So now I'm just going to run this through the machine. And I'm going to do it with my lining fabric on top, and that is because I want to see the boning as easily as possible. Actually, I'm going to put in 2 more pins here. So I think it needs it. All right. Make sure when you get to the parts with your shoulder strap, you can see mine through the fabric here, that everything is laid flat. And don't be afraid to pick up your sewing foot and just recheck that you have both of your seams open when you're going over them as well. And if you want to backstitch a little bit at these boning sections, you can. Sometimes I like to do that just to make the seam a little bit stronger. See that, where the underneath fabric is trying to not make a clean seam and press open? That's why you want to keep lifting and then checking. Just make sure that your needle is down when you do it so your fabric's not moving around all over the place. There's some boning there, so I'm going to do a little back stitch. Okay, now this is my marking for my strap, so I'm just going to do a little back stitch here. Then I'm going to lift up. And actually, while I have this open, I'll go ahead and take a look at the other side and see if there's anything that looks strange. No, everything's looking good so far. Okay, so that is the section that I just left open for my strap. So I'm going to go to about right here, and then I'm going to just keep stitching. So leaving an opening big enough for my strap. Of course, feel free to use more pins than I did. Like I said, I've been sewing a long time, so I don't pin everything. Now for this front section, I'm going to sew straight until the very center of the seam, and I'm not going to turn for the next section. My focus right now is to sew straight to that dot that I marked and to backstitch there. So straight to the seam, then backstitch a little bit just to give it some extra strength, then stop on that seam, and then turn your fabric, and that's going to create a nice pretty V point in the front there. That's the very front of your dress, so that's important. make sure my seam is open. Yes, it is. I'm going to back stitch over that boning section just a little bit. And then here is where my next shoulder strap dot is. So I'm going to do a back stitch here. And then I'm going to lift up. Make sure I left myself enough space. I did. And then I'm going to go past that marking. Do another back stitch. And then keep sewing. Make sure my seams are open. You can see my shoulder strap coming through on this again, so just make sure everything's flat and everything is open. Now the next part of the directions tell you to do your understitching. Make sure that you always check your work before you start understitching. Otherwise, if you've grabbed a seam or something, accidentally sewn somewhere you're not supposed to, you'll have to take all of that out to check to fix it. So just check. Oh, here, I'll show you one that I just did. So this happens a lot when you're sewing. See this tiny bit? I just grabbed a tiny, tiny little section of fabric there, but I want this to be really beautiful. So I'm going to take out just that little section on the inside and I'm going to restitch that really quickly. I'm not finding any more. There's a place for my strap. Just checking to see if there are any other spots like that. Everything else looks good. Yep. Alright, so the rest of the seam is good. I do want this to look as beautiful as possible, so I am going to take out just that tiny little section right there. So it didn't bunch on the lining side, but it did bunch on the right side of the fabric. Take that out. You shouldn't need to take out a whole lot, just a small section if you have any spots like that. Should be a pretty easy fix. Alright. You can just kind of press it back into shape with your fingers before you sew it. So anytime you do a fix like that, also be sure that you backstitch. Okay. And then go right back on top of the line that you had already created. Okay, and now this is all pretty. Okay, one more thing I'm going to do before I do that underlining part. I am a big fan of pressing everything because I think it makes your finished garment just look so much more beautiful. So before I do the understitching and trimming for this, I am going to set up my iron and I am going to press this seam open. And then I'll come back and do the understitching.